Today for Devotions with Daniella, we are reading White Women Get Ready, How Healing Post-Traumatic Mistress Syndrome Leads to Anti-Racist Change by Amanda K. Gross. I'm reading this a little bit every day for my own process of deconstructing the delusion of white supremacy, and if you would like to read along with me, you can get copies here. I have learned so much. This is a chapter called Up Close and Personal, Violence Internalized. Trigger warning, we are going to talk about school shootings. There are more connections in this room than room in this book to link the particular history of toxic white masculinity to its present-day iterations: the Christian right, anti-immigration, libertarianism, the meat industry, the anti-choice movement, professional sports, gun culture, etc. Although it's not mine to write, I look forward to reading about these many important connections in a future book about post-traumatic master syndrome. I will say one thing about gun culture, though. For all our debates on gun control and gun rights, mental illness and toxic masculinity, school safety, and homeland security, we seem to have glaringly omitted a conversation that includes white supremacy. And the denial runs deep. Having been historically dismissed as exceptional incidents or as happening elsewhere, as in regarding gun violence as exceptionally endemic within Black and brown communities, even the suggestion that the Sandy Hook school shooting, in which 20 elementary school children and 6 adults were killed, didn't happen, demonstrates this deeply rooted denial. Narratives of patriarchal protection especially ring dissonant with 2022's tragedy in Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary, in which 19 children and 2 adults lost their lives. Particularly disturbing was the armed law enforcement whose well-funded show of force proved incompetent. A Texas House committee reported that although 376 law enforcement officers, including school, local, and state federal officers, arrived at the scene, it took over an hour for the attack to be ended. Hundreds of officers stood around the scene while an active shooter had 81 minutes to murder children and their teachers. Recommendations to further fund law enforcement or to arm civilians and teachers will do little to prevent future gun violence. According to several studies, arming civilians does not help stop incidents of gun violence either. In fact, in the 2011 shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, an armed civilian almost shot the wrong person while trying to help subdue the shooter. Similar to having guns in the home, especially when not properly secured, having guns in the classroom actually increases the chances of someone being shot outside of an active shooter event. As the news in Uvalde trickled out, one of the stories that hit me the hardest was how parents and family members stood outside, blocked from entering the school. They pled with officers to enter the building and even started to organize amongst themselves to charge into the school when law enforcement inaction became clear. I cannot imagine the frustration and pain and feelings beyond words of what it must have been like for those parents and family members to be forced to stand by and to be prevented from protecting their children. Angela Viescas, the founder of Fierce Madres, shared with the school board that she can't help but wonder if they just didn't find our children worthy of being saved. This traumatic dynamic is something communities of color have been forced to navigate since the advent of white supremacy. With patriarchal power being deliberately removed from communities of color and placed in the hands of white patriarchy, we have many traumatic, ongoing, and historical examples of communities of color being forced to surrender their abilities to protect children to the state and from the state. While those of us familiar with how racism functions might agree with Viescas' suspicions, what might come as a surprise is how those white advantages built into white supremacy ultimately don't protect white children either. That an elementary school such as Sandy Hook in a small U.S. town with a 90+% white population could experience such a tragedy and not be met with widespread systems overturning white outrage exposes the myth of white patriarchal protection. It's incredibly painful, though not surprising then, that those invested in the wicked webs choose to deny reality even as their own children are put in harm's way. Talk about abandonment issues. As Bacon's Rebellion reminds us, guns and whiteness are high school sweethearts. The hardness of white masculinity has been derived from an entitlement to indigenous land, the exploitation of Black, poor people, and people of color's labor, including women of color's reproductive labor, along with white women's submission and an erasure of the existence of those who don't fit neatly into its natural order. Until we get clear about the connections between gun culture and white supremacy, gun violence is going nowhere, or more likely, anywhere at once.